Hello, and thank you all for coming to today's event. My name is Tom Byrne. I'm the president of the Korea Society. I would like to thank our friends and supporters for coming today, including board directors Y.D. Kim, Nick Bratt, Phil Sherman, and Carter Booth. The founder of the Korea Society was General James Van Fleet, a thinking man's general who served with distinction in the Korean War. Today, we are lucky to have two generals here at the Korea Society who live up to the legacy of our founder and have made great strides in helping to educate Americans and Koreans alike on the importance of the alliance and the dynamic bilateral relationship and all its various aspects. Both are graduates of West Point, and both have served as Combined Forces Commander, US-ROK Commander, and United Nations Commander in Seoul. General Brooks was recently at Harvard University, where he sat down for a dialogue with Korea Society Board Director, Ambassador Kathy Stevens. In recent weeks, he was also at Stanford University, I believe, perhaps also with Kathy Stevens. But at any rate, General Brooks has been making the rounds talking about Korea. And I would like to say that one of the first times I got to meet General Brooks was when he attended our 60th anniversary dinner in Seoul back in 2017. It seems like a long time ago, but it really wasn't. In discussions that Vincent Brooks has had, or is having, he brings his wealth of knowledge and creative thinking to help inform the public about challenges and opportunities associated with the US-ROK alliance, diplomatic denuclearization effort. He has suggested that the temporary suspension of some joint military exercises is a calculated risk designed to give diplomacy a chance to succeed. He has also raised the idea that it might be prudent to hit the brakes and the accelerator at the same time. Those are my words, actually. Increasing both the pressure and incentives for North Korea at the same time. But I'm sure in our dialogue today, we'll hear more about that. General Sharp is an active member of our board and a supporter of our activities. He embodies the mission of the Korea Society, of course, which is to increase awareness, understanding, and cooperation between the people of Korea and America. We are pleased that he will moderate today's discussion, and we look forward to hearing their insights. I should also say that General Sharp not only attends our anniversary dinners in Seoul, but also all our annual dinners here in New York City. So please join me in welcoming warmly General Brooks and General Sharp.
Well, thank you, Tom. As they say in the Army, never pass up a good meal, right? But really, thank everybody for coming today. As Tom said, I am going to moderate today. The sequence that we're going to use today is I'm going to do a very brief introduction of General Vince Brooks. Vince is then going to give us his thoughts on kind of where we are and some ideas on how to move forward in Korea for denuclearization and to help continue to strengthen the alliance. I, as the moderator, then will be able to ask him one or two questions. And then about halfway through the dialogue, we're going to open it up to your all's questions. So start thinking about the questions. And I think for those of you who have been here before in the Korea Society sessions like this, the first part is being recorded. So that goes all the way through my questions. And then we'll podcast that. And then once the Q&A starts from the audience, then we cut the cameras. So I guess you can ask what you really want to ask. And we can answer how we really want to answer. But that's the sequence. And again, thanks everybody for coming today. I'm not going to go through Vince's entire bio. I've known Vince for many, many years. He is a West Point class of 1980. So he then served 38 years in the Army after that. While at West Point, Vince holds the honor of being the first African-American first captain. So the first captain is the cadet that is in charge of all of the 4,000 plus students that are at any time at West Point. And Vince was the first captain his last year that he was there. Served around the world. His bio says, and I won't make him enumerate them all, that he has served with militaries of 84 different countries around the world. I've had the honor to serve with Vince in several of those places. We served together for the first time in Korea many years ago, and then in 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart. We deployed the division. Vince was in Kosovo, and I was in the Balkans at the same time. And then we were also together on the Joint Staff. Vince retired last fall, lives now with his wife, Dr. Carol Brooks, in Austin, Texas, and having a great time down there. But it sounds like he's on airplanes more than he is at home right now. But I think I know why. He told me his household goods just got delivered the other day, so he's away while Carol is taking pictures and all of that. He'll pay for that later. But Vince, it is a great honor for you to be here, and really appreciate you taking the time of your busy schedule to talk about kind of, again, where we are and where we think you are heading. So, sir, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And Skip Sharp is not only a friend of many years, but also a mentor. So I have to say that right up front. And my admiration for him continues to this day. Continues to give me good counsel, whether it's on how to be a good general or even how to be a good retiree. And as has been the case for many years, I tend not to listen to him. And so that's why I'm failing in my retirement grade right now, but we're trying to get it started. But I really appreciate it, and I want to thank Steve Norper for inviting me to come up and to do this, and the arrangements that happened behind the scenes to make it possible. And Tom Byrne, where'd Tom go? He's in the back. Thank you, Tom, so much for what the Society is and does, and the legacy that it carries on, and I'm honored to be a part of that today. Let me just share a couple quick thoughts with you, and I hope that this will stimulate you. It shouldn't satisfy you, because I won't go into sufficient depth in this opening portion, and perhaps in the conversation that General Sharp and I have, or through your questions, we can get a bit deeper on some of the things that I may touch on. I do want to highlight first that I'm still counting, and that is the number of days since there was a provocation or demonstration of capability by North Korea. Today's 491 days. If you want to count the time zone difference, you can cheat and call it 492. But the bottom line is that is a long time without some sort of strategic provocation or demonstration of new and emerging capability like we saw throughout 2017. And I think we should take stock of that. I continue to hold out hope that Kim Jong-un is saying to the world that it's a different time than it was before the 29th of November, 2017. And while that will not relieve us of the fits and starts that come with diplomacy, and especially that come with dealing with North Korea, it is a signal that we're in a different place than we were before. Now, I'd also say that I, having been there from 2016 through most of 2018, and coming out of command on the 8th of November of 2018, we saw a lot of things change during that time. We saw administrations change. So the Obama administration changed to the Trump administration, and the Park Geun-hye administration changed to the Moon Jae-in administration. And I was present for that change. And interestingly, there was a bit of an inflection difference that I would comment on just very briefly. Initially, I think we had some concerns about overzealous reactions by the Republic of Korea in response to provocations. And certainly General Sharp can say more than anybody what happened back there with the Cheonanam sinking and with the Yongpyeong-do shelling, and the consequences of that on the alliance and how South Korea feels about their own sovereignty and their ability to respond to North Korea. And that spirit was still in effect as we got into the years of Park Geun-hye. Then we saw a nuclear test, the fourth nuclear test, that really broke whatever progress was being made between North Korea and South Korea, and there was some that was being made at that point in time. South Korea felt that North Korea had broken the deal. And so things like the Kaesong Industrial Complex, the established visits that were in place, those all halted. And then in 2015, we had another escalation that occurred in the demilitarized zone, ultimately resulting in artillery fire from South Korea into North Korea. And then that halted things for a moment, but with it came the resumption of loudspeaker operations, which really agitates North Korea. And those had been stopped since, I think, 2006. And so agitation, irritation, aggravation, these are the terms that describe the escalating cycle that was occurring through 2015 and into 16. And then suddenly we find ourselves without conversation, North Korea and South Korea, U.S. and North Korea, UN and North Korea, but still conversation, of course, and cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea. Fast forwarding through all of the demonstrations, provocations, which became more precise, more effective, higher in yield when it comes to the nuclear demonstrations, more dangerous for the world, we suddenly saw a change. Now, what would cause that? I'll just throw a few ideas out. First, the international cohesion that emerged in building a set of sanctions, ultimately 5 additional sets of sanctions that are, I think, unprecedented in their effectiveness, especially because they are so significantly impacting financial and economic aspects of North Korea and those who want to deal with North Korea. So the penalty of dealing with North Korea went up significantly in 2017. We saw unanimity in the United Nations Security Council for the last few sets of resolutions. That's a bit unprecedented by itself. Even UN Command wasn't established with unanimity back in 1950. And yet we have unanimity in terms of the desire to cause North Korea to stop its programs and to change course. We couple that with those very important actions of sanctioning and international cooperation. We couple that with military activity at that point in time. And our objective during that period was to first make sure we were generating as many options for the national leaders as we could. That meant going beyond our traditional responses and our traditional uses of the military instrument that had become relatively well ingrained over time. Something would happen, we would run through an array of options, but ultimately arrive at, we don't want to provoke something further, we don't want to violate North Korean territorial space, and so we're going to do our operations over the seas or over the airspace of South Korea. And North Korea, I think, became comfortable with that. And so our aim was to find something that would make them very uncomfortable in the military sphere, something less predictable, something that said, no, you're really about to get kicked really hard where the sun doesn't shine. And that came in the form of really a wide array of options. But among them, the ones that were physically demonstrated, were missile launches that we did ourselves as an alliance, South Korean and American surface-to-surface long-range missiles, ballistic missiles, that were fired at the same time that North Korea ballistic missiles were being fired, to make it very clear that we can strike at any moment in time, in real time, while you're still on the pad, looking at your launch. So that happened several times through 2017, and may have signaled something different. Now, of course, we were not firing into North Korea. We were firing into the East Sea and parallel to the extension of the military demarcation line into the East Sea, but just south of it. And always at a range, the target we selected, which was at sea, we'd pick a point at sea to fire into. That range was always the same range to where the launch site was. Now, whether or not North Korea put that picture together, it's hard to say. But there certainly was a different demonstration of what they saw. We had several occasions of multiple carrier battle groups operating in the East Sea, and in some cases a bit further to the south. And at one point in time, we had 3 of them operating together. We also conducted one particular air mission that was very different from previous patterns. Usually we would fly through Japanese airspace, do an exercise with them en route, then enter South Korean airspace, or the Air Defense Identification Zone, to be very precise. Get intercepted by South Korea, do an exercise with them, cross the peninsula parallel to the DMZ, and sometimes drop ordnance into a bombing range just south of the demilitarized zone, and then exit the airspace. Or maybe do a low pass, something that created a sonic boom, something that made it very clear we're in the airspace, we're in the neighborhood. It's just a matter of laying the controls onto the target, and well within range of North Korea at that point in time. This time, we went from south to north instead of from east to west, and flew well beyond that imaginary dividing line in the East Sea that extends from the military demarcation line, and flew up toward the corner where North Korea and Russia come together, and then turned back around. And we did it in the middle of the night with a very robust package that had bombers and jammers and other things as well the kind of package that would be used to strike anywhere inside of North Korea. And so for them, it was perhaps something they hadn't seen before, even though there had been a pattern of United Nations Command never attacking since 1953. This was something different, especially when it was coupled with the fourth component, which is the strong rhetoric coming out of Washington. I think all of these things came together as a mixture, as well as, and I think it's important to note, President Moon Jae-in's offers of reestablishing dialogue, reestablishing communication in the eastern and western transportation corridors, taking the loudspeakers down. That offer was made in the summer of 2017, and in many ways was viewed as untimely, but in fact became the golden bridge across which Kim Jong-un walked in the early part of 2018. Those are the very issues that were picked up first and were carried into action. So at the present time, there are no loudspeakers at all along the DMZ. Not only were they turned off, they were physically removed. There are no weapons inside of the joint security area at Panmunjom. We changed that from October of 2018 up to December of 2018. No armed guards inside of there anymore. There is the authority to cross on both sides now and start walking through the JSA with visits and others. And that hasn't fully engaged yet, but the authority has been there since December. Some of the guard posts were dismantled in the joint security area to start with, but also 11 of them along the military demarcation line from west to east on both the North Korean side and the South Korean side. There was a joint inspection of those dismantled guard posts by North Korean troops, South Korean troops, and United Nations Command. We've had dialogue directly with North Korea once again, with the Korean People's Army, at the general officer level for the first time in 6 to 8 years. And those resulted in the return of 55 sets of remains through Wonsan, not through Panmunjom, where we flew a US C-17 jet aircraft, cargo aircraft, into Wonsan using North Korean flight instructions under North Korean flight control and landed at their major East Coast base and met with the KPA there, had a good discussion, a very personal discussion about life, and then they handed over the 55 sets of remains without playing games, demonstrating that they are able to follow through on things they've committed to. And that gave us reassurance, and indeed it was one of the fulfillments of the Singapore summit, and I would say the most significant fulfillment of the Singapore summit expected outcomes. What's missing now is a new relationship between North Korea and the United States. We have an emerging new relationship between South Korea and North Korea that has been really the driver of any momentum. And I believe South Korea deserves a great deal of credit for that. They haven't broken sanctions. They've been very thoughtful and careful about ensuring they don't do so. South Korea has come back to the UN Sanctions Committee if there's something that's even close. And certainly that's with the urging of the United States, but the bottom line is South Korea did that. And so I don't have any concern that South Korea, or President Moon Jae-in specifically, will break ranks on the sanctions and pressure regime. The opposite is quite true and well demonstrated. So in the meantime, this emerging North-South relationship has created these military actions that I described. And South Korea, of course, as a very strong and staunch ally, even with some irritation about the existence of UN Command, acknowledged the very important role of United Nations Command in helping to oversee this process of changing military circumstances and lowering tension, removing the potential for some sort of triggering incident to escalate into a big problem. And that role is the role of United Nations Command as the protector of the armistice. And South Korea affirmed that and ensured that the UN Command was included in a trilateral discussion on any adjustments along the DMZ, which is still the responsibility of United Nations Command. So there's for me, evidence of positive movement. These are not the most visible things. They should be, but they're not the most visible things out there. Everyone's looking for a very near-term or immediate result in denuclearization, which still is absolutely the aim. And I would say that North Korea and South Korea have U.S. and South Korea are clearly aligned on the desired end condition. But given two different cultural approaches, the ways are not the same. And that should not be viewed as any kind of fissure or fracturing of the ROK-US alliance. It's not that at all. It's just two different approaches. And certainly my encouragement as an alliance commander is that we understand both perspectives and decide together, truly kachikapshida, we decide together and act together and go together on how we implement those things. I'll be candid and say that I think we could do a better job within the alliance of that, of truly listening to the perspectives of the other. In too many cases, especially from the United States side, that has been viewed as interference. And in the case of some of the ideologues in South Korea, the progressive ideologues, and the Blue House is not included in that, but for the progressive ideologues in the body politic, they've said that that's U.S. interference. And so these are the sounds of static on the margins of an alliance that is actually working its way forward. Can we do better? Yes. And I certainly encourage those who are still in the game to do better in listening to one another and finding the right way to use the cultural approach to solving the problem of nuclear weapons and capabilities on the Korean Peninsula. Let me just finish my opening comments, and I apologize for going so long here, on just a couple of ideas. What can be done now that we are in the aftermath of Hanoi, with an anticipation of an unfulfilled visit by Kim Jong-un to Seoul, which was to be the fourth summit between North Korea and South Korea. That has not happened. The timing's probably not right for it at the present time, but that's on the horizon to occur. A desire for yet another North Korea-United States summit, as Secretary Pompeo communicated publicly just within the last few days. What do we do now? Because it's clear that there's a loss of momentum at the present time. Here are some thoughts. First, resuming the implementation of the comprehensive military agreement signed in September in Pyongyang. That's where a lot of this progress was. Those implementations that I spoke about were all manifestations of that agreement. And there's still unfinished work. We still have work to do in the West Sea, for example, in the Northwest Islands. There are more guard posts that have to be addressed along the demilitarized zone. The joint exhumation of remains at Arrowhead Hill is ready to go. And the South Koreans were out there a few days ago, on schedule, on the 1st of April, as they said they would be. North Korea did not show up. It's time to resume the implementation, because we need to have something to work on together. Because when you have something to work on together, you have something to talk about continuously. And so I strongly encourage a return of comprehensive military agreement activity. I also am a believer that we should pick up the pace on a declaration of the end of hostilities. That was probably pretty close to execution at Hanoi. Had the outcomes been a bit better, had there been less surprise on both sides of the positions of one another, then we might have seen a declaration of the end of hostilities coming out of Hanoi. That's worth doing. And we can talk about that in more detail, but I believe it's worth doing for several reasons, which we can get into later. And then thirdly, I'd leave the last point that there now is a need for serious, demonstrated work on economic development of North Korea. Not doing the development. That comes later, after there's fulfillment of expectations. And Kim Jong-un said he would do things to meet the expectations of the world. So when we get to that point, we can go into implementation. But, I worked for General Sharp I was a planner inside of his Joint Staff Directorate for Plans and Policy. And I know that there's a need for a plan. And there has to be planning done now on how North Korea's development would occur. And this is done in concert with the North Korean regime. And in my opinion, the discussions should be led by the Republic of Korea. So any reconstruction, development efforts should be North Korea's. We need to make sure as Americans that we focus on that. It's our ally that will inherit the conditions of the Korean Peninsula, and not let that become China's prerogative on how to develop North Korea. which they could have done for many years and have not done, and I don't expect that they will do, even in the aftermath of all this. They may make some commitments, but it's not in their interest to have a significantly developed North Korea, and they're not going to move fast on it. And I suspect North Korea knows that. So North Korea's future in economic development is not with China. It's with the Republic of Korea and a broader international alliance. So with that then would come an international North Korea economic development fund. And we can talk a bit more about how to create that in such a way that it is visible but not accessible during the time of denuclearization, until such time as we have satisfactory outcomes. And then it becomes accessible with some degrees of control. And the objective there, of course, is to condition behavior. When North Korea does the right thing, they don't have to be at the end of the stage, but they can see money move, international money, where the world is ready to help them, but they can't touch it. They can't eat it yet. And so those are just some thoughts on what could be done in the near term to make it clear to North Korea that there's still a willingness to move forward and to regenerate momentum, which is sorely needed. The alternative is not a good one, and that's absence of dialogue and presence of threat. And we don't want to go back to that time again as we were in 2017. So thank you very much for letting me ramble a bit on opening thoughts. And General Sharp, I'll yield the floor to you, sir.
Great, thank you. So Vince, I'd like to kind of carry on with the last discussion that you just started there about the way forward. Because I believe that, and you've said some of this in your previous speeches, that Kim Jong-un is trying to work his way through and how to balance between the need for economic growth in North Korea, the need to have a better life for his people. He's trying to balance that with how does he then, through getting economic benefit into North Korea, is he open himself up from a regime perspective as the people then trying to throw him out because of years and years and decades of what they would perceive as bad leadership. He's trying to balance information that is clearly getting into North Korea about what South Korea is right now and what the world is like and how different that is. And that's, I think, getting into many, many different parts of North Korea right now. So an urgency that he has to move forward on the economic side. But on the other side, he's working through, I think, a real concern about his and his regime's security, both from a perspective of what South Korea, what the U.S. could potentially do to that regime if we wanted to, looking back on history as to what the U.S. has done in the past in these types of situations. I think he fears a little bit his own people and his own regime from a security perspective. So the question that I would like your, the thoughts on is, do you agree with that? Do you think he's trying to balance those? And in the area of security to the regime, which he has said many times, I need to have security guarantees. What beyond the declaration should we be looking at to try to convince him that your security, at least from an external perspective, is not going to be affected? We'll support that. We're not in for regime change. And on the economic side, you've already talked about an international development plan, but a little more details as to how you would be able to then balance those two. Okay, here's security, here's what, and then the final part of it is, with all that in place, is that enough that Kim Jong-un then finally says, okay, that's enough. I'm really willing to give up my nuclear weapons and become a nation that abides by international norms and treats their people right. I know that's a long, open-ended question, but this balance between developing economics, the security, and how that affects where we want to really end up at the end. Your thought on that balance?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think that he is trying to balance. And now, not everyone will agree. Some will say he has absolute control over everything North Korean, over the people, over their lives, over the economy, over the military, et cetera. And that he's ruthless enough to assert his power and has done so many times. Well, that's true. I think that was more about consolidating power and creating a bit more of an expanded ring of protection around himself, politically and physically. It's interesting that as he came to Panmunjom for the first summit with South Korea, all the roads were shut down between Pyongyang and there. And I don't think it was just so he could move fast. I think he had some concern about his security as he was passing through his frontline units. And that would tell us that maybe there's not absolute control in his mind. There may indeed be absolute control, but not in his mind. He has some degree of insecurity still. And so this has been communicated by him and by others as well. Hey, look, I've got hardliners too, especially in my military. I have to appeal to them. So, hey, could you do something about these exercises? I know you have to do them. I know President Moon has to do them. But can you do something about the exercises? And as a result of that feedback that came back from North Korea, from Kim Jong-un himself, we began to adjust the volume of the exercises. So he's indicating that he's balancing something. Whether that's true or not is still difficult to discern. I believe we should take him at his word. And in doing so, take away any excuse that he would have to not take an action. So Kim Jong-un, you said that you're having to balance these things inside of your own government. We've removed a few of the irritants, so we're now expecting you to proceed as you said you would on whatever issue it happens to be. To the point of security and what that looks like, I think that much public attention has focused first on physical security and military security as an expansion of that physical security. In other words, that if U.S. forces are reduced on the peninsula, then maybe I can think about releasing nuclear weapons. This is projected onto Kim Jong-un as something he might be thinking. I'm of the opinion that it's something much deeper than that. I think that the physical conditions are superficial. And we carry on from Kim Jong-il's comments about the fact that it might actually be useful to have U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula even after there's a new relationship, even after the war is over, because of the neighborhood and having a hedge against adventurism by China, Russia, or Japan, especially those three, requires a U.S. presence. So I think that there probably is less of a desire to remove U.S. force presence than we often hear about. I believe they would actually want to keep a U.S. presence and carry on that same idea from Kim Jong-il. What are they looking for then? Because guarantees have come up. Security guarantees have come up repeatedly. And I think that that's the field in which we need to drill to get to the true depth of what kind of security he's talking about. My personal view is it's economic security that is the primary security concern. How can he protect his economy and protect it from 90% leverage that China has? So right now it's useful that China has that degree of leverage because we're expecting China to help on sanctions and to create the degree of pressure that has already occurred. But is that the long-term future for North Korea? What has China done to develop North Korea? Why are they in the condition they're in if China has had more than 90% leverage for decades? And the answer is North Korea doesn't matter to China very much except as a buffer state. Status quo is what they want there. And they should expect, North Korea should expect, they're not going to get much out of China, even if China has proposals for development already. And they've started that, especially since the first two meetings with Xi Jinping. So if North Korea is really looking for economic security guarantees, how would the international community do that? And this is why I allude to something like an international North Korea economic development fund. Because in that case, the world can say, we want North Korea to develop. We don't want to leave it a basket case when all this is said and done, a country without nuclear weapons, but still, as part of the international community of nations, a responsible player in the region. And they're going to need some economic support to do that. Now, this brings us then back to the issue of balance. How do you do that? How do you accept international monetary support under Juche, a system of self-reliance? And I think that that's going to be a conundrum for Kim Jong-un to work through. That's why other things that signal a new relationship will give him some room to pivot and save face at the same time. This addresses the internal question. So this is where we're getting into the balance. Each one of these actions relates to something else that must be balanced. And when it's all said and done, we could witness or even be part of a geopolitical tectonic plate shift where Korea, north and south together, orients more to the south and east than it does to the north and west. And I would think that that's a very significant undertaking that can have tremendous consequences internationally, but may well be worth pursuing if we want to see China emerge in a more responsible way than they've demonstrated thus far.
Well, I think we'll conclude there, but Vince, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come to the Korea Society today.
Thank you.